Okay, we are recording, so we'll begin. I'm going to share my screen to start. There we go. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's meeting about proposed traffic calming for Kittiwake Drive. Want to thank everybody for taking time tonight to join us. I'll introduce you to the folks who are on the screen right now who'll be answering some questions. We have Luay and Asmat and Karam. They're all from our traffic safety team at the city, and they'll be available as part of our Q&A later on. And behind the scenes, we have Catherine, Armand, and Kara, who are supporting tonight's call as well. So um, you'll meet some of these folks as we go through tonight. I'm Councillor Glenn, Councillor for Stittsville. And tonight we're going to be talking about the proposed traffic calming, and we have a couple of goals or outcomes for tonight. One is to provide you with a good overview and background of what's being proposed and why. We want to answer any questions that you have, and we want to continue to gather feedback. So tonight's call is one way that we're gathering feedback. We've also had quite a few emails from residents with questions and with comments and suggestions, and we'll continue to gather feedback after this call as well for a couple weeks before we summarize everything, and we'll be providing a summary of tonight's call as well as the feedback and next steps in a couple weeks' time once we've had a chance to gather everything together. So as some background, we've had a number of resident concerns about road safety on Kittiwake Drive in the Timbermere community over the past several years. There's concerns about a increasing volume of traffic that may be bypassing the busy Carp Hazeldean intersection. And as we get close to the upgrade of Carp Road, that may increase if people are looking for different options for how they move around the community. There's sidewalks on one side of the street only, so a little different than some of the newer roads of the same type that would have sidewalks typically on both sides. And we see pedestrians crossing at a number of locations, certainly at the park, at the hydro corridor, and of course at every intersection. And I think also because we only have the sidewalk on one side, I think there's probably more of a need for people to cross the road because pedestrians prefer to walk where there is a sidewalk. So in sections where there's a sidewalk on only one side, that makes a difference on this street. There are some traffic calming measures already in place, including signage, various warning signs, to encourage people to slow down, and flex stakes. The flex stakes are the center line flexible signs that are usually in place from April to October. And then in several locations, there's also what we call delineators on the side of the road by the shoulder. And those are designed to narrow the lane so that drivers slow down to pass through that signage. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We want vehicles to slow down. The speed limit is 40 kilometers an hour, and I think this is a really useful chart at explaining the main benefit to lowering speed, which is that if a pedestrian is struck, there's a much better chance of survival the slower a vehicle is traveling. So at 50 kilometers an hour, the chance of survival is 5 out of 10. At 30 kilometers an hour, the chance of survival is 9 out of 10. We're actually seeing a lot of jurisdictions around the world starting to move towards a 30-kilometer an hour limit in residential zones. Currently in Ottawa, most of our suburban residential streets are signed at 40 or 50. And of course, through Timbermere, it's 40 kilometers an hour. But besides speeds, there are some other reasons why we want to reduce speed. Sorry, besides reducing serious injuries and fatalities, there's some other reasons why reducing speed is beneficial. One is quieter traffic. The slower the traffic flows, the quieter it is. It's about improving the overall comfort and sense of safety. And if we can do that, if we can make people feel safer and more comfortable, more people will choose to walk, and there's public health benefits to that. And overall, communities where we see slower speeds of vehicles in residential communities, people have a higher quality of life by a number of different indicators. There have been a number of speed studies done um, over the past few years. The posted speed limit, as I mentioned, is 40 kilometers an hour. Now, what our traffic team does, our traffic specialists, is they will do a speed study, usually over a 24-hour period, and collect all of the speeds in order to calculate the 85th percentile speed. And this is the speed at which 85% of drivers are traveling at or below. And ideally, this value should be as close as possible to the posted speed limit. And on Kittiwake, speed studies have been done in several different locations. We've just got a summary here for you of some of the recent speed studies over the past 4 years or so. So in November 2021, there was one done between Wilderness and Carp with an 85th percentile speed of 52.59 kilometers an hour. In April 2023, between Chantilly Gate and Wilderness Way, the 85th percentile speed was just under 52 kilometers an hour. Between Smoke Tree Crescent and Sirocco in May 2024, the 85th percentile speed was 48 kilometers an hour. And also in May, between Abaca and Abaca, I guess Abaca and Dew, the 85th percentile speed was 48.9 kilometers an hour. And these would have been without the flex stakes in place, so the open road there. So what's being recommended here is installation of speed humps or speed cushions in up to 5 potential locations. These would be implemented through our ward temporary traffic calming budget in 2025 or 2026. The typical cost of speed bumps is about $15,000 to $20,000 each, and that includes the materials, the installation, the signage, and all of the planning and project management work behind the scenes. And the final design would also be reviewed by emergency services, public works, and OC Transpo. Now, we've done a preliminary look from an emergency services perspective, and this road does qualify. It's a candidate where we can do this, but any final design would be subject to requirements and review by the other agencies as well. Just to explain some terminology. So these are speed humps, and they're distinct from speed bumps. I think the best way to describe it would be speed bumps are maybe more what you'd see, or I see them a lot in retail parking lots, and they're quite a jarring bump, and you have to slow quite a ways down, probably 20 kilometers an hour, 10 kilometers an hour, or below. It's quite an impact. Speed humps are a bit gentler, and they're designed really to get people traveling at a speed below 40 kilometers an hour. So if you're doing 30 kilometers an hour, 35 kilometers an hour, you'll be able to pass over these without much of a disruption in your vehicle. We installed these recently in the Fringewood community on Fringewood Drive a couple of years ago. So if you're looking for an example, that's the probably the closest one in the community. These are speed cushions, so they're very similar to the speed humps, but as you can see, they're narrower, and what it allows for is larger vehicles, including buses, including snowplows, including fire trucks, to be able to pass through even faster. So, yeah, a wide axle vehicle would be able to pass through quicker. These ones, I believe, are on Knudsen Drive, which is in Beaverbrook in Canada. So if you want to check those out, it's a good example there. And they're quite effective at bringing down typical commuter vehicles to a lower speed. So I'll just go over where the potential locations are. And to try to orient you, we're going to head through the community as if we're traveling from Carp Road down Kittiwake towards Hazeldean Road. So this is sort of from the top of the street as we're coming down from Carp Road. So just before you would reach the intersection of Wilderness and Sundew is location number 1 as a potential. And a little bit below would be location number 2. And as we continue down, as you head just a little bit past Sirocco and just before the second entrance of Chantilly Gate, you would have location number 3. And then as you round the corner, we've gone through the hydro corridor here, and just south of Abaca would be location 4. and then location 5 a little bit below that. We've had some feedback so far from residents. Some themes are starting to come through. We have had some questions about what studies have been done to measure speed. We've had some people say they don't believe there is a speed problem, or it's not an issue that should be a priority for the city. But so we've tried to present in this presentation some data around the studies. There has been concern about what that would mean for emergency vehicle access or OC Transpo or snow plows. And as I said, that would be something that's reviewed. And then there's been some suggestions for alternate locations of speed humps. So that's helpful as well, and certainly something we can look at. And then there's been a few questions or a few comments, I guess, from people that just say, I don't like speed bumps and I don't want to see them in my community. So we're gathering all this feedback. We're going to summarize it, look for some themes, try to find issues that we may not have anticipated. Residents, you know the community best. So your feedback is really, really valuable as we're trying to decide next steps going forward. So at this point, I want to pause. We can always come back to any of these slides later and go to questions and comments. And how we're going to do that is on your team screen, there is a Q&A panel. And if you have a question or a comment, you can type that into the Q&A panel. And I'll read them out, and if it's something that our traffic specialists here can answer, they can definitely answer that. If it's something that I can give some context to, I can give that as well. And if we don't have the answer, we can definitely take that away tonight and come back. So we'll give folks some time if you've got questions or comments for the Q&A panel. I wanted to start with one that I saw either yesterday or today come in by email. And the question, it was about location of the speed humps. And they had two suggestions. There should be a speed hump closer to the park because there's a lot of people who cross at the park. In fact, there's a path that kind of comes out across the street from the park. And the other is, could the speed humps be closer to the crossing point at the hydro corridor to slow down vehicles where people are crossing really frequently at the hydro corridor? Right now, they're set a bit back, but I don't know if Karam or Lue, if you had any comments, like are there any restraints there, or is that something that could be looked at as potential alternate locations?
Yeah, I can answer this one. Thank you, Counselor, and thanks everyone. So we have a criterias for finding a location for the speed humps in general. For something closer to the park, the issue is the way of the road is divided when you enter the road, basically. So and we need about 7 meters between driveway to driveway between driveways. So the closest we found is like near house number 14.
Yeah.
Um, Again, like we could try to see something closer, um, but like we could review it again. But that's the criteria we try to find. It's the gap between the two driveways. It has to be a minimum of 7 meters. So yeah, that's one of the criterias we it's make us decide where the speed humps need to be.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
And so that when you've got houses then on both sides of the street, which you do further down
yeah,
as we get, I guess, past the hydro corridor mostly. So that would be a lot of driveways that you have
exactly. Yeah.
to work through. Okay.
And also, like, sorry for the second question is near the hydro corridor.
Yeah.
We need to be about 20 meters away from any bus stop, and we try to not have any speed hump near a curve because usually drivers tend to slow down in the curve. Uh, so there will be no reason to have speed humps near curves where people are already slowing down. And again, visual for the drivers. Maybe sometimes they can't see the speed hump, which will cause problem than actually fixing the issue.
Okay.
But yeah,
Okay.
there is I believe there is an OC transport near the crossway. That's why I have to be about 20 meters away from both sides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question we had by email was with the flex stakes that have been in place for the past few years. I guess the one part of the question was, do they actually reduce speeds? That was one. And another one was, would they be removed if speed humps were installed? So on the first part of that, do they reduce speeds? What kind of data do we have in terms of either this street or in general, the success of flex stakes in reducing speeds?
Yeah, I can answer for that. So yeah, I do remember that we have the data. We collected it to check the effectiveness of the flag sticks, but on top of my head, I don't remember. But no, generally, 4 to 6 kilometer per hour speed is reduced with, and especially on this street, we have the side delineator with further reduce the road width. So it helps a lot.
Okay, so 4 to 6 kilometers for a typical installation.
Mhm.
Yeah, I always say a good indicator that the flex stakes do have success is so they're installed April to October, and usually in October, once they are removed, the number of complaints we get about speeding on streets goes up. I mean, it's not specific to Kittiwake, but from all over the neighborhood, West Ridge, Granite Ridge, Kittiwake, any location we have flex stakes, we tend to see residents reporting higher speeds in the month of November. So between when those flex stakes come out and when we start to get snow that also narrows the street, we tend to get a lot of speeding happening. The second part of that question then, which was around if we have speed bumps, would there still be flex stakes? Um,
Yeah,
Asmet?
I can answer it. So once this speed hump will be installed, then we will collect the data and see that the how the operating speed is. If there would be any opportunity, we can look at. But the speed hump are more permanent than the flex stick. So we will
Yep.
we will definitely go with the speed hump and see that how the data is.
Yeah, that's definitely a drawback of the flex stakes is they're not year round, whereas a speed hump or speed cushion is more permanent year round solution.
Yeah. Natsan is also another example, where you earlier mentioned there are the speed cushions are installed, and if you go in the during the spring and summer time, there in between the speed cushions, we have put the flex sticks with the delineator.
Okay. Okay. I don't see any questions from the attendees on this call, but I do think it's worth going through some of the typical questions we've had, just for interest's sake. Another question we had was about the possibility of stop signs or crosswalks, and I think we've had requests for a number of locations. And Louay, I'll bring up the slide that we have about some of the studies we've done, but can you give us just a bit of an overview of when the city is looking at installing a stop sign or a pedestrian crosswalk, what some of the evaluation looks like what factors would have to be in place to make an intersection qualify for a crossing like that?
Absolutely, Councillor. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so for in terms of always stop control, the city has a council approved warrant for reviewing whether an intersection qualifies for always stop control. That warrant looks at many factors like volume of vehicles, the volume of pedestrians crossing, the closest pedestrian generator, for example, a park, a hospital, a shopping mall. It looks at a number of those factors, and then we have criteria assigned for each of those factors that would sort of enable us to verify whether it's warranted or not. And based on that warrant, it would tell us if that intersection is warranted for always stop control, and then we add stop controls to that intersection. The reason is we want to ensure the stop signs. There's a confusion about stop signs. People think that they are traffic calming measures. They're not designed to be traffic calming measures. They're actually designed to control the right of way. And so their purpose is not to calm traffic, but to actually provide, the right of way assignment for vehicles as they approach that intersection. So there are a number of factors. One of them is the warrant. It has to be warranted before we put in a stop sign. And then it looks at also visibility as part of that stop sign review. We look at the visibility as you kind of approach the edge of the road at the intersection, and is visibility clear? Is it not? Etc. Those are the kind of the factors. Similarly, the PXO as well, the pedestrian crossover, to be able to create a crossover for pedestrians, we have to look at the warrant as well. We have some criteria for it to be able to meet the criteria for putting in a pedestrian crossover, which is, again, volume of vehicles, volume of pedestrians crossing the road, speeding across on the streets, all of these factors. And then at the same time, we have to look at we have to have the physical features on both sides of the road to be able to put in a crosswalk. As we have to have a sidewalk, for example, it has to have a curb depression. It has to have twizzies, which is like a tactile surface for it to be compliant with the Accessibility for Ontarians Disability Act. So we look at all that, and then if it's warranted, we take it to the next part, which is the physical elements. Do we have all the elements? If not, what kind of programs does the city have to be able to bring in those elements, physical elements, for it to be available so that we can add that crossing. So there are a number of factors that we look at as part of reviews for always stop control, as well as pedestrian crossing control.
So thank you for that. I'll bring up we put together a quick summary slide of some of the recent studies over the past year. Some that are done, some that are not. But this is just in response to resident requests. So 2024 study of the Feed Mill Creek pathway to do a PXO, that's a pedestrian crosswalk crossing over Kittiwake, and that was found to be unwarranted. So it didn't meet the minimum threshold for the city to fund and build that. And there was a stop sign review done at Smoke Tree, Dewgate, Chantilly. The results of that are still pending. So we do have a study in there, but the sightlines can't be done until the spring once the snowbanks are gone. And then we also had a request recently for a no through traffic signage. And maybe Louie, you can explain this one. The city no longer does local traffic only or no through traffic it's not a sign. There might be legacy signs, but it's not something that the city installs as a new thing anymore. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, pretty much it's because we can't enforce those signs. So they're irrelevant once we put them up. They're not enforceable. The city stopped putting them up a few years back. They're not effective. That the simple sort of reasoning behind why we stopped installing. And then at the same time, we want to reduce sign clutter. We also get a lot of concerns about the amount of signs we have on the road. So, if a sign is not effective, we don't want to put it up unless it has some sort of purpose behind it.
Okay. And that's another thing about the speed humps is the primary purpose, 95%, 99% of it is about reducing speed. I do think they would help on Kittiwake to, if people do have to drive slowly and can't rush through, I do think fewer people would use it as a bypass for the Carp Hazeldean intersection. But that's not the primary purpose of speed humps, but we know they do have a bit of a traffic deterrence as well. Okay, we have a couple of questions and comments from folks. So I want to get to those right now. Thank you. So this is a comment, I believe. Says, I just want to throw my hat in to suggest a speed hump be installed slightly before the east entrance of Kittiwake Park at about 12 Kittiwake Drive, which would increase safety for the park and also for the people who cross the street at the path of Feed Mill Park connecting to Kittiwake. So thank you for that comment. We'll note that. And another comment or question, the link to this said you haven't decided on the number of speed humps or traffic calming measures, which would be between 3 and 5 based on your presentation. How do you decide on the number? Pardon me. Good question. I think part of it depends on budget. They are quite expensive. Um, ten to $15,000, perhaps as much as $20,000 each. So we do have a limited budget. We're looking at there's probably 4 or 5 streets in Stittsville that we've identified as strong candidates. We're looking at the streets that have the worst results on that 85th percentile study. And we're also doing these consultations. There may be some neighborhoods that say, you know what, we really don't want speed humps and we won't go ahead. So a bit of it depends on the final budget. I would say with almost certainty we would not do all 5. And I think part of what we're trying to get a sense of from the community is what are the most important spots in the community for you. So that's likely how we would decide. I mean, in addition to the environmental factors, like Karam has been out to have a visual look and evaluate the street and what are appropriate locations. You know, we think most people are crossing based on counts that we've done, based on anecdotes. Most people are crossing at the hydro corridor and at near the park itself on the top end of the street. So those are factors too. So trying to gather feedback and figure out where the most effective placements would be, and if there's other alternatives too. Quite frankly, those flex stakes, I know they're not universally loved and they're not perfect, but they are quite effective at bringing down speed. However, they're more useful along straight sections of the road. We can't really use them on curved sections. And so that curved section near the hydro corridor on Kittiwake, there are not as many options. We can't put in one of those speed display boards on the curve because they don't work unless they've got a straight line of approach. So we have fewer options, and speed humps entering the curves might be more feasible there. So those are some of the factors. I don't know if Asmat or Louay or Karam, if you have any other thoughts on that.
You've summed up pretty much everything that we look at, Counselor. Yeah, that's in the end, we look at all these factors. We look at drainage as well. We consult with emergency services. We consult with OC Transpo before we put in the speed humps. We look at all these factors and then decide, again, also with community feedback on where to best place these speed humps, considering that we have all the physical elements that we need to be able to put that speed hump. So yeah, those are basically all the factors that we look at.
Okay. We had a question earlier about the automated speed enforcement. If the city can install speed cameras on this stretch, can one of you comment on that?
Absolutely, yeah. So the automated speed enforcement program right now is being rolled out in school zones. There are criteria for that program. My colleagues that work in that program would have a better sort of overview on what that looks like. But again, we look at features, we look at the characteristics of the road, we look at the speed, the operating speed, and whatnot as part of the review. And locations get prioritized based on the locations with the highest sort of speeding patterns. But speed is the number one factor that we use to factor whether we prioritize a location versus another. And then it is right now the city is rolling them out within community safety zones near schools.
Okay. And I suppose a follow-up that I might anticipate somebody asks is, how do we get more police enforcement there? If automated speed enforcement, and I think a reminder to residents, you can always report unsafe driving, speeding, or not stopping, or I've seen people pass vehicles on Kittiwake, which is really not as safe. You can report that to Ottawa Police at ottawapolice.ca/report. That's their non-emergency reporting site, and they compile that data, and they have a specific special enforcement team that they look at that data, and if they see hot spots where they're getting a lot of complaints, they will send out teams to do enforcement. I provide them feedback as well. But if residents are seeing frequently issues with any kind of unsafe driving in your neighborhood, make that report, and the data really does make a difference for getting extra enforcement out there to the community. There's a few more comments coming in. One is says, I am in favor of speed humps on the Kittiwake Drive at spot number 1 near the park. So thank you for that. And then what might the timing be for possible installation this year or next, given the consideration of locations, budget, etc. So I've said it. Best I can say is 2025 or 2026. Budget is a consideration and locations are consideration. As counselors, we have a budget of $75,000 a year that we can direct towards traffic calming. And I try to maximize that budget every year. So like I said, we have, let's say 3 to 5 locations in Stittsville that are candidates for more substantial traffic calming, like these speed humps. And I want to try to get as many into this year's budget or next year's budget. The timing also depends on when we can get contractors and crews in to do it. We would try to bundle things together in order to get the best price possible, but also the most efficiency in terms of getting a crew that can work on several locations at once. So it would be at the earliest this fall, but it could also be into 2026 next year as well. It's a good question. So I'm not seeing any more questions, and I think we've covered some of the sort of hot topics that we've heard about by email quite a bit. If folks do have a last minute comment or question they want to share here, by all means, please add that to the Q&A. And I'm just going to bring up on the screen my email address and phone number. Because certainly gathering feedback does not end with this meeting. Over the next couple of weeks, we want to continue to gather your questions and your comments. Maybe there's something you think of after this meeting, or maybe you're watching this meeting on YouTube and you'd like to send something in. This is the best way to reach us. And like I said earlier, we'll be compiling all of your comments and looking for themes, looking for patterns. We'll try to answer any questions you may have before we move forward and make a decision. And we'll provide a summary of all your feedback on my website in a few weeks' time as well. I'm just going to have one last look at our Q&A here. Okay, I think we're caught up and we are just coming up to about 7:35. So I want to say a big thank you to Azmat and Louay and Karam for joining tonight, and to the folks who we have behind the scenes, Catherine and Kara and Armand. And especially thank you to residents from the Timbermere community who've tuned in and shared your questions both on today's session and also by email. Really appreciate your feedback and your interest in this, and we'll keep you updated through my website and my email newsletter. So thanks everybody and have a great night. Bye.
Thank you very much.